Jake Herway is Senior Managing Advisor and Professional Services Portfolio Manager at Gallup, which has been tracking the state of the workplace in the US and globally. Jake's primary area of expertise is culture and workplace productivity, as well as employee behavior as it relates to strategy, execution, and sustainable change. Prior to Gallup, Jake worked in the financial services industry as an international credit portfolio officer with a major global bank, as well as a human resource generalist in the capital markets industry. Today, Jake is here to discuss the intersection of culture and business success and the role of marketers in the future of work. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Jake to our summit. So glad you're here. How are you doing today?
Thank you. Young-Mi, doing well.
Great, great. So let's start off with a general question. I've come to think of you as the culture guy at Gallup. So tell us, why is culture so important?
Well, there are a lot of mishaps that happen. We've read about those in the popular news. It just takes one person making one poor decision in even a far off place within a company that can take a whole company's reputation, brand, and even business down. And what culture is, you can think of it as an efficiency tool. It allows managing behavior at scale in ways that don't require having constant supervision. Mm-hmm. Culture is the way we get work done. It sets expectations of not only what we can do, but what we should do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Culture is super, super important. I don't know how much training our leaders have in creating and leading culture. What have you seen in your research into this?
Well, it's an unwieldy machine, the
Mm-hmm.
culture of an organization.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is no one solution to a culture. Mm-hmm. When Gallup and I come into an organization, it's always, we have a constant approach and framework, but there's always a different solution, a different set of levers that we pull, even different diagnostic outcomes. Mm-hmm. And as an example, we were working with a 60,000 person global consultancy firm. I lead the professional services, so it's the consultants helping the consultants.
Everyone needs help.
I know, it's everyone needs help, exactly. But it was amazing. It was a frustrating point for them because they wanted to fit into an archetype. They said, Gallup, what are your archetypes? McKinsey has those for the organizational health. Many other culture consultancies have these archetypes. Gallup takes the data-driven perspective that we're individual. Just like you and I have different fingerprints, a culture made up of a myriad of individuals is going to also be different. And I think, Young-Mi, that's why there's not this training. You don't just show up and do an hour or a day or a week even of culture training that's going to be generalizable across these organizations. Again, there are approaches, there is science, there is research that we can take, and perhaps that's the piece that people could be trained on. But in the end, it's what are you trying to accomplish as an organization? What is your purpose? What do you want to be famous for? Then your culture is the means to those ends, you see? So it depends on your identity. Mm-hmm. So purpose, brand, and culture work together, where culture is a driver of the other two outcomes.
Mm. So let's talk about purpose in just a moment. First, because you brought up that you go into organizations and help them understand and refine the way that they're approaching culture, and that it should vary for each organization because each organization is unique. What are some tools? And you referred to some research, but what are some tools that leaders might apply in trying to implement some of this leadership?
I would say the first and foremost tool is an understanding of your purpose and brand. Mm-hmm. So it's having clarity of first who we exist for, in this world of global stakeholderism, global capitalism, this is a difficult prioritization exercise of who we exist for, because there will be trade-offs among stakeholders. Do we exist for the environmentalists? Do we exist for the society, the community at large? Do we exist for shareholders? Do we exist for employees? The trade-offs are difficult. The prioritization exercise, though, is important. Once you know who you exist for and how they are prioritized, then you say, what is our purpose for these stakeholders? And that prioritization continues to iterate as you answer these questions. So these questions in of themselves are tools, and the answers are tools to give you direction. Mm-hmm. Then when you say, who do we exist for? Why do we exist for them? And what do they expect of us? Or what is the reputation that we want with them, the brand that we want? Once those are defined, then when you go in and start saying, well, what do we change in our culture? The tools, a good way to organize your tool set is to think about it in terms of the employee life cycle. How are we attracting talent? Are we putting job ads out there that speak to the purpose and brand and even the who of our organization that we're serving? When we hire, do we filter for these things? When we promote and reward in performance management efforts, when we develop, you see, so you think about the employee life cycle from first time I read about a company to being hired, onboarded, engaged, developed, and performing, even to exiting. That's a good organizing model for identifying opportunities to then influence the culture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So those questions that you started off your response with are very interesting. Do most companies find them easy to answer or hard to answer?
Most companies think they've been answered.
And do you agree?
I would say that one of the questions we ask, we have a bit of a diagnostic that we come in with to say, how strong is your culture? You know, and we call it a purpose-driven culture. The more purpose-driven it is, then it's aimed at the outcome that you want, why you exist. So we are assessing with a 12-question assessment how purpose-driven. One of the questions has to do with how operationalized your purpose is. Mm-hmm. Can you use your purpose to say no to business? Mm-hmm. Can you use purpose to prioritize your initiatives? Can you use purpose to validate or even explain why a decision was made, a corporate decision was made? Mm-hmm. That's in essence what the question is getting at. Mm-hmm. And honestly, so far in the many interviews I've had where we've done this diagnostic, the answer is almost actually never a resounding yes. Yeah. If you do it on a scale of 1 to 5. So easy, hard, I would ask the question, is it operationalized or not? Yeah. And I think the answer most often is going to be no.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that next because the intentions may be lofty, the words may be, beautiful, but getting that, especially in large organizations, but we also see it in smaller organizations as well, getting that to drive every behavior, every decision seems to be not only it's always been very difficult to do, but in today's world of change and disruption, it seems like it's really a very Herculean task. And so this gets at, kind of what you were saying about why culture is so important and purpose can be a defining principle. So can you talk more about how that can be kind of disseminated throughout the organization in ways that help?
Yeah. One of the questions that we also ask as a outcome measure of whether the culture is actually functional in helping you achieve your purpose is if employees feel that the purpose makes their jobs feel important. Mm-hmm. So it comes right down to the job description, what I do every day.
Mhm.
And right now, only 40% of American working population, can fully agree that the purpose of the organization makes their job feel important. So that in of itself tells you that it's not operationalized regularly.
Mhm.
But how do you make that connection?
Mhm.
And it goes back to that employee life cycle organizing framework of the employee life cycle I talked about. Different organizations are going to do better at different spots in that in that employee life cycle. Trying to think of an example. One of the current clients I'm working with, you go through, well, is it the way we attract? Is it the way we hire? Is it the way we onboard? What they found was that it was the way they did their performance management.
Mhm.
And it came down to the manager relationship to the employees, and specifically the manager's ability to help them see that connection between what they do every day and to the purpose.
Mhm.
And so it became a very individualized training that we did with managers to say, how do you engage with your direct reports in this conversation, in this ongoing conversation, to help them see that their job is important because it's directly linked to the purpose, a
Mhm.
clear purpose. And the second thing we did, besides just the manager training and giving them talking points, etc., is we put a measure to their purpose. So in this example is a women's health company.
Mhm.
We said, well, instead of just measuring whether your customers are engaged with you or your employees are engaged with you, why don't we measure the level of women's health in the world that you're trying to influence? And we can go out, and what we can do is poll, as Gallup does. We also have that polling capability to poll women across the world to understand their perceptions and their behaviors relative to what this company is trying to accomplish. Are they exhibiting healthy behaviors? Do they perceive that they have the health care that this company is trying to provide? And if not, now as an employee, I see a global measurement of my company's purpose that's telling me it's working or it isn't, and where I can make the biggest difference. And all of a sudden, I can uh, not just in a closed door conversation between a manager and I, but also in a very public, available way, access insight into what my company's trying to improve because it's being measured and
Mhm.
codified. And now I can connect to the opportunities that are exposed through that measurement.
Mhm. That's very interesting because the way that you talk about this, it sounds like it's not so much the leader designing culture and designing purpose, embedding it into processes and procedures and rules and all of that. It's really awakening it in the employee, it sounds like.
Young me, it's a combination and maybe a sequence of. So you're exactly right. There is, I like the word awakening. I have also used the word discover
Mhm.
or define, simply
Mhm.
put.
Mhm.
When we begin these relationships, we do a very heavy upfront, not just a survey, but also focus groups, interviews, and we review materials, both strategy, brand, as well as internal materials, communication materials, to try and help put it in the words of the employees, not in the
Mhm.
words of the executives.
Mhm.
Our purpose in the words of the employees, the most common words and the most resonant words.
Mhm.
And when you start to discover it in the vocabulary of the employees, then that iterative process begins. So it's been discovered, it's been awakened, if you would, and then the leadership has the opportunity to really bring it to life, to grow it, to feed it through the changes that they make in their own leadership style, as well as through that employee life cycle, interventions through that employee life cycle. And then it's reinforced through those manager conversations
Mhm.
with each individual making the even more clear connection of what they do to that purpose that has been discovered and now being
Mhm.
invested in and built
Mhm.
up. And then, like I said, those measurements
Mhm.
show what matters. You measure what matters to you. And if you're measuring purpose, that gives credibility, that gives visibility, and that gives resonance even more so to what you've defined and discovered or awakened
Mhm.
from the beginning of that process.
So, regarding purpose, this may sound like I've already asked this question, but purpose is a little bit of a different or more specific part of the question I asked earlier about how well do companies understand where they fall along the dimension of the questions that you're asking them. How clear have you found companies' purpose to be before we even think about operationalizing them? You know, are they just lofty words, or are they really, strategically designed for the most part?
Certainly a spectrum.
Uh-huh.
It's many leaders that might listen to this will resonate and shrug their shoulders at the idea that you can throw out a purpose statement of 10 different companies and blind it,
Mm-hmm.
and you won't see the difference,
Mm-hmm.
especially if they're about them, about the company, especially if we're going to be a $10 billion company, we're going to be the best in this industry, we're going to be the top provider, whatever. If it's about the company, you immediately know the who is off.
I like that so much. Yeah.
Yeah. And the purpose is off. So that's one end of the spectrum that's very easy to be like, okay, I'm way off because this is all about me.
Uh-huh.
It's not about what we do and who we're benefiting. You move your way through that spectrum, and it becomes one that is the strongest purpose statements there clearly define who, what, and how. Who, so in and of itself, it's the why, right? The purpose is the why, but your why, who are we serving? Why are we serving them? How are we serving them? Who are we serving them? Who are we serving? What are we serving them with? And how is that service different? You see, and you can get that into one line. The example would be, let me say this first. How is your competency, your core competency? Why does the world need us versus anyone else to provide this service? It's because we do something better than everyone else. So in the case of this healthcare company I was talking about, they use the slogan, the science of sure. They won't even put a technology out there if the FDA will allow it, only if they will allow it. They have standards above the FDA standards that they have to meet before they put out a technology, a healthcare technology. So their purpose is to improve the women's health. There's your who. Through the science of sure, that's your how, with the best diagnostics in the world, and that's their what, their diagnostics machines. So it's a good combination of who, how, and what makes it much more relevant for me on an everyday basis to connect with it versus others that I shouldn't call any clients out. But let's just give an example. I'll make it a hypothetical.
Okay.
We empower people with what? How? How are you empowering someone better than my grade school teacher is empowering my kids with education? Like, what is it that you bring, and how are you bringing it in a differentiated way that helps me connect with it and understand it, and thus make it operational? I can't make decisions off of, does this empower people? Should I buy this business? Sure, it'll empower people to, have cleaner teeth. Well, you're not even in the teeth. You're not even, in the toothpaste world. You're a B2B business, but it all empowers people. So the what and the how is on the other end of the spectrum, getting more refined and specific in your purpose statement is powerful.
Yeah, no, I like your example about the healthcare company because you were talking about the measurement that you did with women around the world, and that provides a tangible example of is their purpose on track? Is it authentic? All of that. But with companies that need more help, I know that you have this series of questions that they need to input, do some self-reflection. I've been in many of those sessions myself, and it's much easier to come up with the words than to have them be truthful, right? To have them be deep and authentic, whatever the intentions are. That's not an easy statement to make, especially for a big sprawling organization. So how do you help them?
There, what I found is that the statement
Mhm,
is the tip of the iceberg. It helps in the right places, the right times to have specific behaviors and or values defined, and
mhm,
even illustrations of what those look like in everyday
mhm,
work.
mhm,
So I'll say that our goal is to improve women's health through the science of Sure.
mhm,
The science of Sure is about being able to have hard conversations to make sure that our technology is more accurate than anybody else's. And this behavior of pushback becomes part of what that purpose looks like in action, and it's defined pushback. Okay, but what does that look like?
mhm,
And we have illustrations and vignettes, if you would, of examples of well-respected people and everyday people in the organization that have pushed back even when it was hard or uncomfortable for better results. And those stories get told to employee candidates.
mhm,
Those stories get told in onboarding.
mhm,
Those stories get told in training and even in performance management conversations when we're saying, look, you're just not pushing back the way we need you to. Women, as a result, are suffering because you're not pushing back in our conversations. You see
mhm,
that connection to our purpose back to the behavior?
mhm, mhm,
What we need you to do is something like this: tell the
mhm,
story, tell, or
mhm,
show the vignette. This is the kind of pushback that we're expecting. And so it helps employees see the behavior that needs to exhibit through the
mhm,
storytelling, through
mhm,
the illustrations,
mhm,
connecting it back to what they're trying to accomplish as a company.
mhm. So it starts with, in terms of employees, it starts with the hiring process. You're already doing some of the onboarding before you even decided to onboard that person to a
Yes.
certain extent, it sounds like.
Yes.
How important is it to hire the right person for your purpose, your culture, versus onboard them appropriately?
Well, onboarding is a moment in time.
Mhm,
Hiring a person, you're getting 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years of influence into who they are. You're not going to change a person, their beliefs, their point of view in an onboarding process. So a
mhm,
lot of these things are hardwired in people, or at least predominantly hardwired. Things
mhm,
can change and do change in the way in our beliefs, of course, and in our the mental elasticity, of course, all of that.
mhm,
Point is, there's a lot of investment that's gone into people before they show up for the job interview.
mhm,
And you got to understand that that is going to be very difficult to change and not a high return on investment effort.
mhm,
So that becomes, and all business pundits, as long as I I know that business pundits have been out there have said who you hire is the most important decision.
mhm, mhm. But you also said, and this is very provocative, I'd love you to go into detail. You've also said that hiring the right talent doesn't get you very far if you don't have the right leadership.
It's a percentage, I would, if you think about it that way, or if you're trying to finish a race to get to the finish line, I wouldn't say not very far. It just doesn't you won't finish the race with just the right talent. The
Mhm,
right talent will get you to mile 20,
mhm,
but we know that the famous last mile, the last six in that analogy,
mhm,
that's a hard slog. And
mhm,
that is where the leadership empowers that talent
mhm,
through things like we've been talking about, investments we've been talking about, so that they cross that finish line, they can be their best selves, their fullest potential is realized, and you get the collective benefit of their highest performance for the benefit of your company and the stakeholders, and they are more fulfilled because they've been able to realize their own potential at the same time.
mhm, mhm. So let's talk about the leader a little bit more, because it feels like and this has been going on for a while, But the kind of shift that we're experiencing now is unprecedented in many ways in how we're defining leadership. What are the competencies that need to navigate in this world of change? It's quite different than it was, say, 10 years ago or so. And so from your vantage point, how are our leaders doing?
I think I'll answer a different question first and then come back to how they're
Okay,
doing.
all right. Mhm.
I think one of the biggest changes or shifts here is leaders need to be plugged into the holistic well-being of their employees, but also the holistic well-being of all their stakeholders,
Mhm.
constituents.
Mhm.
It's just a much broader perspective and expectation of accountability for leaders these days.
Yes, yes.
So that's a major shift. How are they doing? To be honest, I don't have, I guess for a proxy, you could choose to look at our employee engagement measure.
Yeah, I know. I was going to come to that because it's very concerning.
Well, it's been low for such a long time, and
Uh,
actually just the smallest uptick
I know.
is a meaningful improvement, and we have seen engagement
Mhm.
move in the positive direction. So if I were to use that as proxy for leadership, I would say the answer is better. We're
Mhm.
doing better. But
Mhm.
expectations go up and our performance might go up like this. It can
Right,
be, there can
right,
become a gap
right,
there that'd be
right.
very hard to catch up to.
Uh-huh.
Let me say this. I think the inequality we see in society is going to exist among companies. You're
Mhm.
going to get some very big winners
Mhm.
out of those leaders and their companies that figure this out,
Mhm.
figure out how to manage more holistically across stakeholders and do it in an authentic, purpose driven way,
Mhm.
create those cultures that create the brand
Mhm.
that they want,
Mhm.
or reinforce and don't undermine the
Mhm.
brand that
Mhm.
they have invested to create.
Mhm.
And those that don't are going to be even bigger laggards to those.
Right. Right. I think that uptick that you're talking about preceded the pandemic, and during the pandemic, it went even higher, right? How do you explain that? What is driving that, especially during this period that everybody is calling the Great Resignation?
Yeah. How do you explain it's in I think it comes back to what's happening in society
Mhm.
being addressed and expected to be addressed in the workplace.
Mhm.
So the
Mhm.
workplace right now is in my house. Is I'm assuming you're at your home. I don't know, but you're in my office slash my piano room
Uh-huh. Yeah.
where my kids come in, and the one might even walk in the next few minutes.
Uh-huh.
Work has infiltrated our lives.
Mhm.
I have it every day. I'm doing emails before I go to bed and when I wake up. I mean, as much as I try to manage my well-being, I admit to it,
Mhm.
right? I'm doing all. So we are so society's coming right back in. I mean, we are merged and more merged than we ever were post-pandemic than pre, even though that
Mhm.
was a trend already happening that's been accelerated.
Mhm.
So that merge between personal life and what's happening in society and the workplace is so pronounced now that the expectations and demands on leadership and organizations have just been exacerbated. And that's thus the why you see the great resignations is higher expectations.
Mhm.
And that's one of many influences that I could point to.
Mhm.
Others of which I'd rather not get into. Some of them political, some of them very
Right.
charged topics that have caused that same
Right.
uh,
Right.
inequality or separation.
So the uptick in the employee engagement score, is it because the people who are left are just more engaged? They like their organizations more?
The last time we measured this on a global basis was before this great resignation had been identified anyway or
Mm,
popularized.
mhm,
At the time, it was earlier this year, 2021, when we came out with the latest global engagement
mhm,
research, State of the Global Workplace.
mhm,
And at that time, there had been a bit of a rally
mhm,
and work had always been on the trend of becoming more of a person's identity
Mhm.
and part and their life, as opposed to just a job that's separate
Mhm.
from everything else that they do in life. That
Mhm.
trend had been ongoing, but then, as we said, the pandemic and the events in the world that followed it or came with it expedited that trend.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
you do see the leadership, yeah, the leadership mandate just being a bigger one,
Mhm.
and creating a more engaged workplace uh, became it was like a rallying cry. It was a place where we came together. It was a place where we found friends. It was a place where we found
Mhm.
support. It was a place where we found purpose and meaning and even stability in
Mhm.
some instances
Mhm.
in a very unstable world. And so engagement, the access to people are more open. We were talking about and still do mental health and well-being and things we weren't talking about
Right.
before,
Right.
diversity conversations we're having. So all of this created, I think, an uptick in
Mhm.
engagement, or was part of, again, the creation of that.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. I know a lot of people are talking about generational differences in employee attitudes and things like that. And I had a, unsettling conversation with a millennial the other day where he said that, he doesn't believe it's possible to love your work. He doesn't believe it's possible to get fulfillment from your work. He doesn't know anybody who does. Have you seen anything like, I mean, that's kind of like a devastating statement.
Well,
Um,
it's also a bit counter to the trends, but I love that, because when we talk about generational differences, we talk about gender differences, we talk about any differences between any kind of category of people, those are averages.
mhm.
And if you spend any time with statistics, you know the danger of averages. The average actually doesn't exist,
Right,
right?
right. Uh-huh.
Uh, so your example is a great one, where the trend, especially for younger generations, is for work to become meaningful on their definition of who you are and what your life is about.
Right.
And for that conversation, for that millennial to say just the opposite, is a great example of the fact that we need to treat each individual as an individual.
Mhm.
Forget where they come from, how old, young, whatever demographic that you might put an average on, that might help you at least initially. But the uh, the reality is, it is harder for some people to
Mhm.
connect their work to their happiness and their success. They see it as a means to an end,
Right.
and that's
I
key.
wonder, sorry, I wonder if his comment is related to industry and discipline because he's a tech worker in a FANG company. And so I wonder if there's some association there. You must see industry differences in your,
Yeah, there are some industries that are very easy, like healthcare, to
yeah,
rally around a purpose.
yeah, yeah.
Some are harder. Financial services, people
Mm.
can say, well, I help you get a house sooner, I elevate the quality of life. But in the end, when you take so much money off of the
Mhm.
top of the transaction, can you really feel fulfilled?
Mm.
It's a fair that's a fair
Mm.
statement, that there
Mm.
are some work that's more purpose oriented than others, naturally.
Mhm.
That said, there is there is something that everyone cares about.
Mhm.
No matter who it is, you care about something.
Mhm.
And if you can find a way in your work to make
Mhm.
a difference in what you care about,
Mhm.
you're beginning to live a purpose-driven
Mhm.
life and have a purpose-driven career, and
Yeah.
thus it'll be more fulfilling.
Yeah, I mean, one last statement about that. Maybe it has to do with the rapid kind of life cycle. I don't know whether it's related to life cycle or just complexity, but many of the fan companies, they started with very strong purpose. And some of that has been kind of like muddied in recent days, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it's
yeah,
very fragile, and there
yeah,
is a balance. You need money
yeah.
to
Yeah.
accomplish your purpose.
Mhm.
Nothing gets done in this world without money, and yet
Right.
money can be a very deadening uh,
Yes.
I would call it resource or influence on a person's
right, right.
on a person.
Yeah,
So
I teach and I ask, one of the things that we talk about is motivation. And students believe that their primary motivator is money. And that's
mhm,
not what the research says, but it's very hard. Even if you present the research to them, it's very hard for them to believe it.
right. Wait, you're saying you're not they're saying they're motivated by money and you're trying to tell them that they're not. Of
No,
course
no, I'm saying that money makes, it's what they base their decisions on, but it's not really a motivator, right? I mean, up to a certain level, maybe if you have no money to eat, of course. But after a certain point, that research, I think Daniel Kahneman was the one who came up with it, above like $70,000, money ceases to motivate.
yeah. Well, how much money are your students making?
Nowhere near $70,000, I don't think.
That's the
Some of
motivation.
them, some of them make more. It depends on which set of students, but yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
No, trust me. When I was that age, that's what I was after too.
yeah,
And at a certain point,
that's true.
I'm still at, and I'm still am, because
Mhm,
I still want to be able to have financial freedom
mhm,
and stability. So
mhm,
I would say it's a motivator, and it's more or less of a motivator depending on where you are and your income level and lifestyle choices or expectations. But I would also say that it comes down to individuals. So we can look at the industry, you can look at trends, all that.
mhm,
But look, maybe that person you talk to grew up in a neighborhood, a poor neighborhood, so all they saw was inability to get what you want because you didn't have the money.
mm,
And so money is number one. And
mm,
it is the driving force and might be the driving force for that person, no matter how wealthy they are. That
mhm,
Danny Kahneman research has the same uh, risk that all research does. It's an average.
mm,
70,000 is an average.
mhm,
And there are some people who
right,
could be rich as, Bill
mhm,
Gates and Bezos, and still
mm,
they're going to be their motivation because they've had so many years, formative years of seeing the devastation of not having enough money. It could never be enough.
yeah,
And it's not to their fault. It's
yeah,
just the reality of that individual.
right, right. And you're right, people do go through phases where different priorities are important. But I was just thinking of this in the context of thriving.
Mm.
And, I think that there's less of a link between money and thriving after a certain point. But
And and at that stage in life, it's just really hard to see.
yeah, yeah,
You're absolutely right. At a certain point, they need to be making decisions
yeah.
about
Hmm.
fit, if you want to call it that, and purpose. And
Right, right.
but
Yeah.
but it's hard at that age. It's
Yeah,
hard.
yeah, and it's a tough conversation overall because so many complexities. So let's shift the conversation, still sticking about culture and purpose. With regard to the role of marketers, you've made the very interesting statement, and I've shared this with many of the speakers actually, about how CMOs and CHROs need to get together. So please unpack that for us.
Well, I mean, we're almost 45 minutes in the conversation, and I should have said this at the very beginning. Why is a culture guy speaking at a marketing,
Uh-huh.
in a marketing to marketers? And it's because of the things we talked about, that culture can make or break your brand.
Mhm,
Culture is how we behave. Culture
mhm,
is how we get work done. And that combination of the marketer and the CHRO, chief marketing officer, chief people officer, if you would, it's how do we bring the brand that we want or need in the marketplace to life in the way that we behave every day and the decisions that we make on a local level, meaning again, there's not someone there supervising, all the way up to the corporate level where it is the executive team making the decision.
mhm,
How do we ensure that those behaviors are aligned and the outcomes of those decisions are aligned to the brand and reputation we're trying to create?
mhm,
And the research, not just the research, but also my experience working with companies and professional services abroad,
mhm,
consultancies. This healthcare company I'm talking about serve is a B2B, so it fits into my world. Legal, accounting, law firms, accounting firms.
mhm,
We've done engineering firms. I've been working with all these different types of industries within the broad professions.
mhm,
Sure, the story is the purpose, when it drives your brand and drives your culture, that purpose becomes the aligning force that creates what I call a brand culture, a culture that creates and reinforces and maintains the brand that you want. Purpose is the common denominator, the aligning force between brand and culture.
Yeah, I agree completely, Jake Hurway. I hope that you work with more companies and spread this gospel of purpose and culture, because nothing could be more important in today's world of change. Thank you so much for joining our summit and sharing your research, your insights, and your wisdom with us. Is there anything that you want to leave us with in terms of hope for the future?
Well, I couldn't agree more that I do hope we can build more purpose-driven cultures, which will strengthen brands and improve lives, improve well-being across the world. I'll just say personally, for me, my personal purpose through work is to make work more rewarding for other people. And by rewarding, I also mean financially as much as emotionally, because you do need that money to be able to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish in your world, in your life. The more purpose cultures that we can build, the more powerful brands that are authentic and purpose driven, the more rewarding work will be for the world.
Nice, very nice. Jake, where can folks learn more about your work and your thinking?
Well, my thinking, LinkedIn, Jake Hurway. I'm the only one in the world.
Wow, that's unusual.
It's unusual, and right now we'll see what happens in future generations. But there's only one Jake Hurway on LinkedIn or Facebook or any of those. But Gallup.com, if you click into culture transformation under workplace services, culture transformation is my world. That when you read that page, you'll see my thinking in that as well, and our work and experience. Otherwise, yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn, Jake_Hurway at Gallup.com. Happy to help people achieve their goals and make work more rewarding.
Great. Thank you so much for being here today, Jake.
Thanks, Young Mi. Appreciate it.